I'm Ken Coates, a Macdonald-Laurier Institute a Senior Fellow. Canada faces a really interesting dilemma, having to do with pipelines, but more broadly with resource development. And if you listen to the way the country sort of describes this now, you'd see this as a classic sort of confrontation between environmentalists and Indigenous allies on one side and corporate Canada and the government of Canada and provincial governments on the other. It's not that simple. And in fact, the situation is far more complicated and in many ways far more promising. There are Indigenous people who are strongly opposed to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, strongly opposed to oil sands development, there's no question of that, and to resource development in their own backyards. And in fact, in that context, they're no different than other Canadians, many of whom share those same sort of views. But the idea of an Indigenous alliance with the environmental sort of sector is actually really misleading. Aboriginal folks who have extremely strong environmental instincts and want to protect their own homelands are actually extremely active in the resource development industry. They've got collaboration agreements with mining companies, partnerships going on with oil and gas firms. The Indian Resource Council represents 130 First Nations who currently produce oil and gas on their own lands. We have Indigenous economic development corporations that are extremely active in the oil and gas sector. So it's really important that as we tackle this big debate about pipelines in general, resource development, that we not do to the Aboriginal people what we've always done. What non-Aboriginal people always do is they put Indigenous folks in a box and say this is where they belong. And right now we're putting them in this box that says they're strongly aligned with the radical environmental movement, they just want to stop development in its tracks, they're not interested in larger economic development. That's simply not true. And in fact, it's very misleading. Indigenous people have, over the last 30 to 40 years, fought like crazy for the right to have a legitimate role to play in the resource economy. And if you listen carefully, you will see that Indigenous people have a vested interest in the long-term economic development of this country, are finally poised to participate in Canadian prosperity in a sustainable way, and are determined to actually have an active and prominent role as we sort of go forward into the 21st century.